Welcome to the Centurion 360 podcast with PR marketing and crisis management expert Michael Bilello.
And welcome to Centurion 360 podcast. I am your host, Michael Bilello. You can check us out on Twitter at Centurion360. You can also send us an email, info at centurion-strategies.com. Feel free to contact us about the podcast, suggest a topic or a guest. Today's guest is Preston Rudie. Preston Rudie spent 20 plus years as a journalist. He's won 20 plus Emmy Awards, 6 Edward R. Murrow Awards. Too many awards for us to list. If we did, we'd be here for probably 10 minutes longer than we planned on. And recently, as of 2014, Preston crossed over to the other side of the communications game. He is currently the communications director for U.S. Representative David Jolly out of Florida's 13th district. So we'll catch up with Preston. We'll talk to him about his current role, as well as some of the similarities, parallels, contrasts, comparisons to his former life as a journalist. And quite frankly, how his previous experience, I think, makes him very effective at his job today. And I will also warn you, Preston is a diehard Wisconsin Badgers fan. He is also a diehard Green Bay Packers fan. I've seen him wear the styrofoam cheese on his head. The guy's serious. Also very impressive. And I'm very impressed that he's able to make some time for us today, considering he is also a new dad, I believe by 13 days or so. So congratulations to he and his beautiful wife, Veronica, on their beautiful baby girl. So glad that she's healthy, and we wish you guys the very best and know you'll be great parents. So without further delay, we will be joined now by Mr. Preston Rudie. I believe he is in the St. Petersburg area today. Preston Rudie, welcome. Thank you for joining the Centurion 360 podcast. How you been?
Hey, I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to talk with you again.
Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. You know, it's funny. There's a bit of a role reversal here because usually I was concerned about the questions you were going to ask me, and now I get to ask you questions.
You know, it is different because I'm used to being the one that's kind of in control, asking the questions. But you know, I've had about a year now to kind of get used to this new role of being on the other side, if you will, and you know, it's not that bad. The biggest thing that I found over the years, Michael, when I would go out in the field, that a lot of people would have apprehensions about doing interviews because, of course, they never knew the direction of where the interview was going and that type of thing. I understand, you know, usually what reporters and you know, people that are asking us questions are going after or they want. So I think I'm a little bit more relaxed to understand how it goes. So that experience has helped me transition to this role quite nicely.
Yeah, and obviously I could see that. I think your experience is going to make you very effective and successful and sought after in your new role, if you will. So I wish you all the best, and when you're up in D.C., we'll definitely get together and celebrate. So take us back. When did you know you wanted to be a journalist?
I would say probably when I was, you know, as a kid growing up. You know, I was thinking about this the other day. When I don't remember the age, maybe 7, 8 years old. My dad had a small business. I grew up in a small community called New London, Wisconsin. And my dad had a small pharmacy. And I remember putting together a neighborhood newspaper. So I took like a sticker from Dairy Queen and a couple of other things. And I went to a Xerox machine, a copy machine, and I put this little thing together and some handwritten things that I had, you know, collected from the neighborhood and did actually like a neighborhood newsletter, a neighborhood newspaper, if you will. And then we tried to sell it for like 5 cents to the people in the neighborhood. We actually got some people that bought it. And I'm sure it was simply because they thought that, you know, all right, it's a kid, we'll you know, support him and, you know, the fun that he's having. But I knew early on, I always liked, Michael, current events. I was interested in news, a bit of a history, you know, buff, if you will. So, you know, those were things, news and that type of thing seemed like a natural extension. And when I was in high school, I participated in forensics. So I did what they called extemporaneous speech, talking about current events. So as I was going through, fortunately, when I got into college, I kind of knew the direction that I wanted to go. The big question I had, though, was what did I want to do with that degree, or where did I want to go? Was it going to be print? Was it going to be radio? Was it going to be television? And I'll be honest with you, when I graduated college, I looked like a 12-year-old, okay? So television really wasn't an option. Not a lot of news directors wanted to hire a 12-year-old. So I did radio for a few years, and then I got into television a few years later.
Wow. Now, go back to your first newspaper. Do you remember any of the stories on there? Your first story?
You mean the neighborhood newspaper?
Yeah, the neighborhood newspaper.
I think we did, seriously, I think we did like a review of Dairy Queen. We did something about like fishing in the backyard pond. We had a pond, I mean, just stuff like that. We basically mimicked a regular newspaper, with different ideas that we had. And I'm sure that if I went into my parents' attic and if I dug around enough, I would definitely be able to find one of the original copies of what we put together.
I definitely think you need to make an effort to find some of those. So when your circulation went down, did you go towards relationships and some of the tabloid news in the neighborhood?
No.
Mrs. Smith's divorce and the wild dogs in the neighborhood?
Yeah, we did whatever we could to build circulation back up. Yeah.
That's funny. So what was your first official assignment, moving on from the illustrious local newspaper to your formal training, your university experience? What was your first assignment?
So a couple of things that I remembered answering that question. So when I was in college, I did a number of internships, and that's always key. It really gets you the opportunity to get a feel for what the business is really like without being in the business. So I remember my first story that I did when I was in college for broadcast radio was on Tracy Webster. He was a point guard for the University of Wisconsin basketball team. I did a story on him, and that was we did that on radio. And then I also did some time for the Wisconsin State Journal. I worked in the sports department. It was actually called a six-pointer, where back in those days you would actually pick up the phone and you would answer coaches that would call in with the sports information, the box score, if you will, from their prep events. But I did do a couple of things, girls softball game, covered a local triathlon. Those are the first stories, and I still have those actually framed. So those were actually like real publication type things. But when I moved on and I got into television, the first story that I did, my friends still give me a hard time about it. And I can kind of laugh about it now. So the first day that I was on television would have been in July 1996. And I remember that because we did a launch in Green Bay for the NBC station doing local news, coinciding with the start of the Atlanta Summer Games. So the night before we were going to go on the air, there was an F5 tornado that hit a community called Oakfield, Wisconsin. It was a disastrous tornado. I mean, F5, and that's a powerful storm. Fortunately, though, no one was killed. And what I did, I was mimicking things that I had seen. We rolled up into this town. Now it's nighttime, right? You really can't see anything. All the power's knocked out, and there was a canning factory that had been leveled. So the photographer and I get out, and I remember doing what I thought would be kind of this long stand-up that we could cut up later. And I'm doing this stand-up where I'm picking up cans of peas and corn, and I'm just kind of going on this long 3-minute, descriptive, stand-up of what I'm seeing, and it was horrible. I mean, it was probably the worst thing that anyone could ever have done. And my friends, they've kept it, and they continue to circulate it on Facebook from time to time and remind me of it.
Wow.
That was the first story that I did, was actually covering an F5 tornado. Fortunately, we just use a small snippet of that in the actual broadcast, but that's the first story that I ever wound up covering on TV.
Yeah, highlighting the damage and destruction with cans of peas and corn. It's very impactful.
Strewn everywhere, I think was the word.
Let me ask you a question. So 96, that was an interesting year. How did the O.J. Simpson trial and the reporting on that trial influence you as a young reporter?
Well, it made, that was an interesting trial because that really put court cases more to the forefront. I mean, once the O.J. Simpson trial came into, broadcasting, I mean, we all remember him in the courtroom running to our television sets and watching the verdict live on TV. Of course, before that, we all remember the slow speed chase in the white Bronco. The impact that had was that told those of us on the news side that people really were interested in court cases. Now, he was a unique individual because of the notoriety they'd already had as an NFL star, working as a movie star, that type of thing. But again, that made us all aware that, if you can convey certain points and information about court cases, there is an audience that's out there. And so I had to educate myself as I was working through as a journalist, kind of how court cases work, how courts worked, terms, that sort of thing. So I'm sure that the O.J. Simpson trial was something that all reporters that were working at that time, or even college students, kind of followed, and it really kind of gave them kind of an education in terms of what they can expect as they move forward.
Yeah, I think it influenced a lot of young journalists, a lot of young attorneys. Certainly just a very memorable case. And then being in Florida, Florida's had some very interesting cases but we've been reported on. Have you reported on any other cases in Florida, like the Casey Anthony story? Did you have anything?
Yeah, I didn't have to do the Casey Anthony trial. Of course, that was in Orlando, but we did have somebody at our station that did go over and cover that. But the biggest case that I've covered in the last probably 10 to 15 years was definitely the George Zimmerman case with Trayvon Martin. I was in Orlando for the entire trial, covering that from both jury selection through verdict, and then the reaction after the verdict. And that was a very interesting case because, to be honest with you, when you sit and you watch a trial and you're there every single day, you have a different view of that case than, let's say, somebody who might just be seeing your reports or reading the newspaper, because you're seeing the entirety of it. And so when the verdict came down, I'm going to be honest with you, I really wasn't that surprised based on the information that we were presented at trial. That's not a commentary on whether or not the jury got it right or not. Right. I'm just saying that I wasn't surprised by what the verdict was that was delivered, and then it was what was handed down. Yeah. But that was by far and away the most memorable court case that I ever covered. Going back years before that, when I was in Milwaukee, I covered just the tail end of the Mark Chmura, former Green Bay Packers tight end, a case that he was involved with in Waukesha County. Had other cases, in Florida. Certainly covered aspects of the Bubba the Love Sponge Todd Schnitt trial. That was a civil case that generated a fair amount of publicity because that was two essentially shock jocks involved in a case that people still kind of turn to and talk a little bit about. So court cases were the things that I covered. But I'll be honest with you, over the last probably 5 years, it was heavy into politics, which of course led me to the job that I'm in right now.
Sure. Yeah, to go back to the Trayvon Martin case, something that I think changed the way that perhaps you did your job was social media. And that was a case I remember that was being played out on social media. How did social media influence your reporting? Did it help? Did it hurt?
Well, certainly the timeline or the deadlines, I should say, in social media has pushed you to have to try to get information out. When I first started back in 1996 in television, I started in news back in 1992. Social media wasn't around, so you might get a story and then you would have time to continue to talk to other people about it. Maybe do some additional fact checking, that type of thing, because the story probably wasn't going to make air until either that evening's newscast or maybe not even until the next day. So the timeline has been so accelerated with social media because let's say I get some information as a reporter and I may want to go ahead and call 3 other people and do some additional digging and background checking on the story, right? The problem is, and what happens is that all of a sudden another reporter might get that information and they're not concerned about doing the legwork and the background checking that you are, and then all of a sudden that shows up on social media. Then you've got your boss or a news desk that's saying to you, hey, why don't we have this information? What can you tell us? That type of thing. So I think I would say right or wrong, social media has accelerated that push to get information out there quicker. As a result, I think more errors are made by journalists at all levels because of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And now that you're on this side, the communication side, where you're interacting and managing the media's interaction with Representative David Jolly, that's only going to it's obviously a force multiplier when you're pushing out positive information. But like you said, when there's error in reporting and it seems to bounce on social media, that makes our job a lot more difficult. So yeah, social media has been certainly a game changer. And I think it'll continue to be a useful tool on both sides. But like you said, it's got to be a tool that everyone respects because it does, in fact, cause some people to rush to reporting and increases error, in fact.
Yeah. Michael, I remember this is going to go back, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. I was on a cruise. It was for one of the brand new cruise ships. They bring on, members of the media, that type of thing, for one overnight to kind of do a review. And we were working with USA Today, the cruise editor for USA Today. And I remember a friend of mine who was also on the ship. We were having this discussion about social media, and we made a bet. He was like, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, within, a couple of years, half of America will get their news through social media. And I was adamant there is no way that's going to happen. I think he was proven right. A lot of people get their news through Twitter and through Facebook. And I joke, I used to say in the newsroom, reported on Twitter, confirmed on Facebook, right? I mean, unfortunately, that's a joke because you have to take everything that you see online, social media, with a grain of salt, because it is such a rush to get information on there. So, it's the sad reality is that, again, errors are made as a result of that. So when I was a reporter, and I have my blue check mark next to my name on my Twitter account or whatever, I was very aware that that is my reputation, that is my news organization's reputation. It's on the line whenever I would tweet something out. So you really wanted to make sure that you either had it right, or, as always, you had attribution so that you can then say, listen, this is attributed to this agency, this organization, this spokesperson, that type of thing, because that is what they are telling us at this time.
Yeah,
so.
And the appetite for information on social media, as you suggest, is insatiable. Yeah. And so when you compound that with the amount of new, I guess you would call them new media organizations that are solely online based, and they're using headlines that, if you read some of these headlines, they're ridiculous, but they are just to do that. They're to get people to read that, get their attention. They post it either on Facebook or they retweet it. And then as a journalist, you're trying to figure out if this is correct or not. What's the source? Does it have any legs? And then obviously that creates a lot of tension between you and I'm sure the news director, who wants you to be the one to break something and not this new media, online media. So it's definitely changed it. So what would your suggestion be to someone who's in school right now, has wanted to be a journalist since they were 6 or 7 years old like yourself? What's happening to the industry? What should they do? Should they be concerned more on the content creation side and stay digital, behind the scenes, off the camera? Or do they try to become an on-air news personality?
Well, I would say, first of all, if you're thinking about anything to do with the news business, make sure that it's something that you love. Because when you first start out, and I think this is universal, no matter what outlet you go to work for, if you're looking at doing something online, over the air, in print, whatever, you're probably going to do and work long hours and not get paid very well. And you're going to have a lot of responsibilities that, let's say, when I first got into the news business, I didn't have. So what I mean by that, too, Michael, in real terms, is that when I worked in television, I always went out and worked with a photographer, somebody that shot the story, somebody that edited the story. It allowed me the ability to focus on gathering facts, talking to people, writing, that sort of thing. Most of the people that are hired now, the vast majority of them that are going into television, they're one-man bands. They are shooting, they're writing, they're editing, they're doing it all themselves, and they're on the same timeline that I was on, or same deadline and timeline that I was on. So they come in the morning, they're handed a story, they go work, and they're on in the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock news. They're having to do all of that. So, logic just tells you when you're doing all of that extra work, you don't have the time to do the additional phone calls or maybe that one extra step that I was allowed to do. So you need to be aware that if you're looking at getting into the news business today, you're probably going to have a lot more responsibilities. There's going to be a lot more pressure on you. So you're not only dealing with that, your on-air product, whatever your prime outlet is, but then again, you've got the social media. News organizations want you to be on Twitter. They want you to be on Facebook. They want you to be getting information out on other platforms that they've got. Mobile platforms. Can you do like a 15 or 20 second video clip promoting your story at 1 o'clock, even though your story is not until 6 o'clock? Well, the facts and the information that you gather over this next 5 hours might change, but you've got to be ready to go to kind of give them, hey, this is kind of what we're working on. This is what we've got so far. So, you have to be able to multitask. And again, you have to be prepared to really work in a business that you're going to have a large workload and probably not get paid very well. And then here's the other thing too, Michael. Kids today that are coming out, they need to be prepared to move around a lot because, it's rare that you find somebody that from the time they graduate college to when they retire or even 10, 15 years down the road, they're in the same job. The television business, the newspaper business is somewhat like it. Radio is like this. And certainly with, online outlets, it's the same thing. People are having to move around to different communities. That can be tough, but that's just the reality of how the business is.
Yeah, I think when you look at the transient nature of the business, as you just suggested, and you combine that with the technology aspect of it, meaning you've got to be a technologist, that's causing the news corps that I'm interacting with, that you're interacting with now, to be a much younger news corps. And so it's a good thing in some regards, but it's also a bit concerning because they lack in some of them, not all of them, but some of them lack the experience, the seasoning. Are you seeing that are you seeing that as well? Is that sort of your judgment as a veteran journalist?
No, without a doubt, without a doubt. I mean, what happens is when you have younger people that are moving into the new business that don't have the experience. When I started out, Michael, you essentially were climbing a ladder. I mean, if you look at my resume, it's, I think, very similar to people of my age. So I graduated college, I moved to Iowa, worked in radio for a few years, moved back to Wisconsin to Madison, worked in Madison for 3.5 years, working in radio. I covered courts, crime, and the state capitol. I mean, when Tommy Thompson was governor of the state of Wisconsin, I would go into his briefing every week. We would sit down in the conference room, and he would have for about an hour where he would just say a few words and he would open it up for questions. And then I would go around offices to office, talking to different legislators, that sort of thing. But that kind of gave me the experience of building relationships, of knocking on doors, of seeing how government agencies and different entities worked. And how that process worked. Then, of course, I worked into television, worked in Green Bay for 3 years. Then I went to Milwaukee, worked there for 3 years. Then I came to Tampa, Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, the 14th largest market at the time. But I had more than a dozen years of experience. So I was ready for a larger stage, if you will. And, what I see now, reporters that have maybe 1-2 years out of college, they're coming in and they're sent out on a story. And they're not thinking to ask maybe the right questions, the right people. They don't understand how a government agency operates. In other words, they don't understand how things work through on a committee level, whether it be in a school board, whether it be for a county board, city council. They don't understand how. Heck, I will be honest with you, Michael. I talk to reporters that they don't understand the difference between, and I'm embarrassed to say this, Tallahassee, Florida, which is where the state legislature is, and the U.S. House in Washington, D.C. And they're kind of lost. They're not equipped with the knowledge of just how your own government works. That's a failure both when they're in school, but also the experience that they get as they move on. And that if they don't have that, how can they then be able to go ahead and adequately educate the viewer or the reader with the information they have, because they're not understanding how the whole system works. So, I mean, yeah, there is a downfall there that then I think hurts the viewer, the listener, the reader in what they're able to present to them and the information they're able to get. Because if they don't understand how it works, the viewer is going to lose out in the end.
Yeah, and if we see a degradation in the quality of reporting, and that's being met by a larger need for information and content creation, then clearly it behooves all of us to make sure that what we're reading, what we're reporting, everything is factual, is accurate, before we share and disseminate further bad information or information that just hasn't been properly produced. So let's go to your role now as a communications director. How is being in journalism for 20 plus years, how has that helped you be a better director of communication and policy?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I just understand what outlets probably want. And I understand that the deadlines that they're working on. So in terms of what they want too, I understand that generally speaking, they don't always just want to see my boss on camera or talk to him. But if I can give them more around that, like a face on a story, if I can give them a local constituent that's impacted by this story so they can tell their story around, and then I can come and I can say, listen, this is what we are doing. Here's what we are offering. Here's how we're helping. I think that that's kind of the experience that I've got allows us or allows me to either, number one, put the congressman in a light that he is going to get coverage on stories that we want, but also at the same time not waste reporters' times by pitching them things that they're never going to, it's never going to see the light of day. So, I think that experience, understanding how the business works, what they want, the timelines and the deadlines that they're operating under, I think hopefully makes me better suited for this job and allows me to highlight and to put a positive spotlight on the congressman.
Yeah, and I think there's been a shift change as well, where because everything is based on a 24-hour news cycle and there is so much technology and we have this new media as well, again, feeding this information machine, it almost forces you to be more open and interactive, on behalf of the American people. So it's a much faster information exchange, faster flow of information. So without a doubt, your experience as a journalist is going to give you the leg up. So what have you seen by way of social media and how your office communicates with constituents? Are you very social media friendly?
Yeah, I mean, we try to be. We've kicked around a couple of different ideas in terms of like writing about every single vote, but the reality is that we're taking hundreds of votes. You can't talk about each one online, but there is a voting record that you can find online and on the Congressman's website. We don't hide that, so people can look up how he votes on every single issue, which is good. We try to highlight some of the positives. We try to highlight certain legislation that we are promoting or that we're backing, introducing, co-sponsoring, that type of thing. And then there are times where I just try to let people know how, what David is like as a real person, I mean, I think that's important that through social media, they might learn a little bit about the person that they've elected. So, the tough thing that I wrestle with, Michael, if we're completely honest, is, how much anger there is out there sometimes. And when we get, let's say it's somebody that's tweeting at us or commenting on Facebook, is that a majority view or is that just one or two people? And that's one of those things that there's really no answer. You can't really find that out. So you just kind of use your gut as a gauge on that. But, the beauty of what I like about social media is that David, will see people that will write comments in on Facebook or tweet at him, and then he'll go ahead and he'll say to me, hey, can you get a phone number, connect me with that person? So honestly, it's beautiful in that you have an avenue to reach out to the congressman and he will see it. And then he may respond to it. And that's a beautiful thing because it's an unfiltered message that's going right to the congressman. And I like that. That's a positive, I think.
Yeah, it certainly keeps you connected. And if the biggest complaint against Congress is that they're not home enough in their home district enough, certainly social media, especially those who live in California, it certainly keeps them connected. And obviously, we would encourage everyone to be a little bit more involved in the conversation by using Twitter and Facebook with your representation. And if you have a question, ask them a question because likely it's someone like you who's very happy to answer it. I also think that it's like you said, there's good and bad. And there's, when you look at the brand of Congress, it's taken quite a hit. It's not the most popular. So that's where sort of I think that sentiment comes from. But I do believe it can change. And I think that with people like you who are a little bit more proactive and positive and engaging, and even Congressman Jolly being a little bit younger than your average congressman, being much more social media friendly, I think it's going to pay dividends for the district, for his brand, his career, and your obviously interaction with constituents as well as the media. Because really, constituents today on social media are sort of the media, and the media is watching how you interact. So. Yeah,
what's nice, by the way, going back, Michael, too, is, and if you don't get an answer on social media, the good thing is that chances are the congressman, at least in our case, has seen the message. So it's something that is probably going to be on his radar or that he's thinking about. So even if he doesn't respond, you probably have sent him a message that he's seeing that he's now thinking about. And that's a good thing, too, I think.
So how is this different? What are the immediate differences between this and when you were a journalist?
Longer hours, if I can say that. I mean, you work long hours when you're a reporter, but nothing like it is when you're on this side. I mean, I literally from the moment I get up in the morning until I go to bed, I'm doing work. And I tell this story. I work for a member who sleeps 4, maybe 5 hours a night. 5 hours would be a good night, right? So a little bit about myself. I usually go to sleep around 11 o'clock. That's when I like to go down. And the last thing that I'll do is I will check my BlackBerry to see what David, the congressman, and he prefers to be called David, if David has sent me anything else or a text message or whatever. And oftentimes there's an email from him, right? So I will respond before I go to bed. I'll go to bed. I'll wake up at some point during the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And the first thing I do when I get up is I'll pick up my BlackBerry and I'll take a look. And usually I'll have a message back from David already. I'll respond to him, and then I'll wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock, and then boom, there's already a response from him because the guy doesn't sleep, right? Yeah. But it's because I found that for us, for our relationship, it cuts down and it moves that back and forth even quicker, farther along, so that when I've woken up, we've already had an exchange from the previous night. But I mean, I'll be honest with you, Michael, it's an insane amount of hours. I find it interesting now that, I came into this as, this is my role. And I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't care if it was a Republican or Democrat. I just believed in David as a person, understanding that the job is about service and helping others.
Right.
But what's happened along the way is that I kind of laugh, but I also sometimes get a little frustrated when on my personal Twitter account, right, I get people that are now pinging me and sending me messages and saying things because they're trying to get it to David. They're like, oh, he's the communications director for the congressman, or, you know, I get pulled in many different directions now because of my role, which is something that I didn't really expect. But, you know, I guess that's to be understood. And then again, as I mentioned to you earlier, Michael, is I am just surprised by the amount of anger that's out there. And it's not just from one side or the other. I mean, there is a lot of anger that's out there, and we see that. And, you know, I like to think that we're a very moderate office. We listen to everybody. It doesn't matter what your political affiliation is or what your viewpoint is. We meet with all folks and we try to help folks when they have problems. But man, there's a lot of anger out there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Yeah. And unfortunately, you're going to have to deal with that. That's sort of your job, is to diffuse those situations.
Right.
Yeah. It's not any fun. Trust me from experience. Yeah. And that's the whole thing, is the you know, technology aspect, that phone. That's something you're constantly connected to, and we experience the same thing in the private sector, you know, as agents in agencies, and we have clients across the country. It does not stop. And what I've learned is that if you're willing to check your phone, you're pretty sure there's going to be some type of communication for you. So there's always going to be something for you to respond to, and it's a never-ending game.
You know, Michael, let me go back to what you were asking too. So this is a downfall that I think I've seen now that I'm on this side about the news business. The other thing that is I've learned is I've developed this kind of frustration on issues where people don't have all of the facts or the whole picture. They get kind of a snapshot, and you know, the media might provide them with this bit of a snapshot, and then social media might only give them this much, when let's say the full picture is this much. And so, you know, when we get pushback or complaints about votes or things on issues, it's like you want to take the time to explain to them, but sometimes they don't want to listen to it, and they believe that all they need to know is what they got in this picture or in this picture on social media.
Yeah.
So there is a frustration being on this side that sometimes they don't have all of the facts, or they're not looking at the entire picture,
right,
and the impact that it might have on everybody in a community.
They're used to.
So there's a level of frustration there sometimes that I have internally with that.
Yeah, news consumer society in general has been conditioned for the impactful tagline. So whatever is the most impactful, that's how they've been fed information, and that's the reaction. And right now, it's obviously all ratings driven and it's click driven, and so you're going to deal with the most salacious stuff because it's trying to get their attention. It's trying to obviously you know, impress upon their core values and get them to react as such. So it's doing exactly what it was meant to do, and you're obviously on the receiving end of that. So you're splitting your time between DC and St. Petersburg. One thing I have to say though about DC, and I'm in Arlington right now, is the monuments. No matter where you go, you can't help to be inspired. Yeah. So even though we're working long hours and we're tired, and seems to be an event in this town every single night and something to do all the time, no shortage of work, some very hardworking people as well in this area. So you've got to keep up with them. Yeah. But very easy to be inspired. And the monuments are amazing. The detail, the architecture it's the history, phenomenal. What do you like about the area by way of monuments? What's your favorite monument?
Well, that's an easy one. The World War II, the National Memorial. If you go there, especially on days when they're operating honor flights, which, you know, this time of year there's almost one every single day. So they're bringing World War II veterans up to the memorial from all over the country. Right. One of the other cool things is that when you go there, if there are a number of honor flights for that day, often you will see Bob Dole, who's there. And he'll be greeting people. He's there, sits right out in front and greets folks as they come. I like it because, you know, it's a memorial that is celebrating, you know, the greatest generation, but you can find veterans from that time that are still coming. And of course, we're losing those veterans every single day. Right. So that's why I like it, because I'm going there to a memorial that's celebrating what they did. And yet at the same time, you see veterans from that era that served in World War II. And you talk to the stories. Recently, you know, we met a World War II veteran in our district for a project that we were doing. And, you know, he told me the story, and his name's Irving Zeider. He passed away 3 months ago. and he was in his 90s. And when I met him, he reached his hand out to shake it, and he goes, "I bet you can't open up my grip," right? He was, challenging me to open up his hand. I mean, he had a firm handshake, right? But so this is the story. He was a double Purple Heart recipient, and he was injured during World War II in Italy. And I asked him about how he got his Purple Heart. So he was injured in Italy. They took him to the infirmary. He was there, and he wanted to be discharged. They wouldn't discharge him. So he upped and walked out himself, hitched a ride back to the front lines because he was like, I want to be with my guys. And then he was injured a second time. That's how he got his second Purple Heart. But the story just told me a little bit about, the determination, the bond. I'm sure that it's certainly there still today with the men and women that serve. But, it's just to hear that story from somebody who, he didn't care, even though he was supposed to be in the hospital, in the infirmary. He was like, nope, I got to be with the men that I'm serving with, and I don't care. Walked to a point where he got a ride to the front line to get back with his guys. I mean, that's just, it stuck with me. I don't know why, but I mean, that's just such a powerful, powerful story. And you talk to the folks that served during World War II. I mean, it's great. I had a woman who was in here today. She was a Navy Wave, so she was a volunteer. She's in her 90s. A woman by the name of Vivian Cunningham. Met her last year. It was about a year ago, and she only served in Wisconsin, so she never obviously as a Navy Wave, they didn't see the front lines or whatever, but they were offering support from back here at home. And it's just I find it really cool to talk to these people about, whatever they could do to help to pitch in. That's just such a great story to hear. And so that's why I like the World War II Memorial.
Yeah, it's a beautiful memorial. It's very moving. That whole area is just moving. Arlington National Cemetery is obviously a very stoic place. I'm drawn to the Jefferson Memorial. I think just because it's very timely. To your point, those of us who are a bit frustrated with the progression of law and institutions and just the way the country's has been run for the last 20 years, and to the World War II point, I feel like the last, and I can say this as a veteran, I feel the last war that we really were devoted to and focused on winning, and we actually won, was in fact World War II. So I think World War II is always going to be a very meaningful and I think just a war that teaches us about what we call the greatest generation. And like you said, there's not too many of them left. And we're lucky enough to be from a state that houses a lot of them. So if you ever have any time to even interact with them and have them tell them a story, that's how we can honor their tradition, is to pass their stories on and hope that people remember the most important parts.
And you brought up the Jefferson. One of the things that I like to do, because our hours are insanely long when we're in Washington D.C. though, so the time that I'm free is fairly limited. But love going to see like the Lincoln Memorial or Jefferson in the evening time. Yeah. That's such a great time. It's a little quieter. And I'm talking evening, like, 10, 11 o'clock midnight at night, so, not nearly as many people, but, it's just a great time to just kind of go there, reflect, think about things. And you're right. I mean, Washington, D.C. in the area, it's just such a jewel with so many memorials, and a great place to be. Great place. I got to be honest with you, Michael. I go into work when I'm in D.C. and I don't think it's really sunk in that I work in the U.S. Capitol. I mean, this is where I work. It's a pretty cool thing to be connected to this and to our government and all the great things that this country represents. It's a kind of thing that you really kind of have to pinch yourself and be like, wow, this is really my job.
Yeah, and my guess is that when you forget you're actually working in D.C., your BlackBerry will light up in the darkness of the Jefferson Memorial and remind you to get back to work for sure. Yeah. Well, Preston, I know you're short on time today, but we really appreciate you visiting. I look forward to seeing you up here in the district. We'll definitely connect and perhaps have you on again in the future.
Absolutely, and it was great connecting with you, Michael.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you again.
Sounds good.
Our best of the family. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Centurion 360 podcast. Follow us on Twitter @Centurion360. Until the next episode.